Edit audio.
Two things about me. I'm an only child, and when I was a kid, and still to this day, I am and was very, very observant. So, what does that mean? That means that I hung around, or I was always around older women. So, my mom's friends, neighbors, aunties, of course. My grandmother played a huge role in my upbringing. I was always around adults. Again, I'm very observant. So, I did a lot of listening. And what I learned very early was that, damn, there is a lot that comes with being a woman. Hello, and welcome back to the Be Well Sis podcast. I am your host, Dr. Cassandre Dunbar. How has life been treating you? But more importantly, how have you been treating yourself? So, as you can tell, today we are talking about perimenopause. We'll be talking specifically about how it impacts Black women, and we'll be discussing some possible signs that you are entering that stage of life and some possible conversation starters to have with your provider to help you get relief that you are seeking. My mother had a ton of gynecological conditions and issues. So did my aunties. My mother had several surgeries when I was a kid, to the point where I was scared of losing her because she'd had several surgeries and I didn't know all what it meant. What I did know is that she prepped me before she went into surgery to let me know that there's a chance that, you know, she would tell me where things were and how to do things. And I was always prepped that, one day I will not be around and you have to do A, B, and C by yourself and know where this document is and who to call for this and that. And thank goodness everything was always successful. But what I did know is that whenever she would go into the hospital, she'd come back home and it would be a whole lot of recuperating that went along with it. And she was slower and it was a little bit gory. There was bleeding and things like that. And I didn't get all of it because, mind you, I was less than 10 at this time. So I understood that there was a lot that happened with the female body, but I did not understand the ins and outs of it. And I just thought, well, this is what it means to be a woman. I did learn, however, of one word that seemed to echo quite a bit as I would eavesdrop or, as I say, being observant around the women who would talk about their gynecological issues or their women issues. And the word was fibroid. And fibroid in Creole means fibroid. I learned that way later. So I just thought because so many women were talking about those fibroids and they had remedies for them and they'd go to the doctor for them, some of them would have surgery for them. That I thought that that was just maybe a period or maybe just something that we all as women experienced. Outside of the fibroid or the fibroids, I learned that just by observation and less by conversation that I would eavesdrop, I learned that there was like this period where things kind of changed. Lots of conversation around things suddenly being different for some time. And it felt like as a kid watching that such and such, this auntie would experience it. And then like a couple months later, somebody else would experience it. But it was like a chronic, long-term, like drawn out conversation. And I didn't know what that all meant. And it wasn't till later that I realized, and I mean much, much later, medical school later, that the main thing that they were experiencing was perimenopause. They didn't have the word perimenopause per se, but I understood there was something that was really, really distressing. And I was just like, well, dang, something else that I have to look forward to. Not really. So we had a conversation with Dr. Camilla Phillips on perimenopause and fibroids, and she went into great detail about fibroids, what they are, and what are some possible treatment options. If you have not listened to that episode Dr. Camilla Phillips, please check it out. I have the link down below in the show notes. But today I want to really talk about perimenopause and specifically how perimenopause shows up in Black women. So to begin, let's go ahead and get a myth out of the way. Most people think that perimenopause is something that occurs in the 50s, and that is something that we'll think about then. And that is not true. Perimenopause is a transitional time where the main female hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone, they fluctuate and then those levels decline. This period could be anywhere from 7 to 10 years before menopause. Menopause is defined as when a woman does not have her period for 12 consecutive months. So for at least 1 year, no periods, then we call that menopause. And that is just the beginning of another chapter in life. But leading up to that, again, it could be anywhere from 7 to 10 years where there are fluctuations in the hormone levels, and then eventually they will decline. So while those hormonal changes are occurring, they're going to correlate with so many other things that are going to manifest in our lives. So outside of the reproductive changes, so there'll be changes in the menstrual flow, maybe the cycle. So maybe somebody who had a strict 28-day or 30-day cycle, maybe now sometimes it'll be 25 days, sometimes it'll be 27 days. So it is less predictable in when the cycle will come on. And there might be some changes in the flow. So sometimes the flow may increase, might become very heavy. Sometimes it might diminish, and sometimes it might even be spotting. So yes, there are some clear reproductive changes that occurred in the perimenopausal period, but there are also some other changes that are going to occur throughout the body because estrogen and progesterone don't only impact the ovaries and the uterus, they also are going to play a huge role in things like our mood, in things like our ability to thermoregulate. There are so many symptoms that occur that oftentimes we disregard as being connected to this time period. Anxiety may be one of the first things to show up even before our hot flashes. So we've heard of hot flashes before and we automatically assume, okay, yep, she's going for the change. But even before that, sometimes years before that, anxiety might kick in. So somebody who's never suffered from, debilitating or anxiety that's going to impact their everyday life, now it may present in a way that now she is seeking help and maybe being for the first time prescribed anti-anxiety medications. Super common. Most women are diagnosed with anxiety medications in their mid to late 30s. Another thing is going to be brain fog. We've talked about this extensively in a previous episode that is also linked down below in the show notes. Another thing is going to be disrupted sleep. I have seen so many conversations online about women who are waking up all of a sudden at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. And it's a consistent thing that happens that wasn't their usual. They're still tired, they're still exhausted and could use the sleep, but now their brains are awake. Oftentimes I've seen people talk about how maybe there is a spiritual significance to that time and maybe that's time for prayer or spirit is calling, so on and so forth. And hey, I don't know. But what I do know is that progesterone plays a role in our sleep. So whenever those levels are fluctuating, it's also going to impact our quality of sleep as well. So the frequent wakings at night, perimenopause. Mood shifts. So outside of anxiety, sometimes there is newly reported depression. So somebody who has typically never experienced long-term depression, so outside of situations, now they're presenting with depression as well. And also I've heard so many conversations about this rage. So people who have been just pretty easygoing before now just are filled with rage that sometimes scares them. That is also one of the symptoms of a perimenopause. Things like weight changes, especially around the midsection. Lots of women report having difficulty losing weight or just maintaining their normal weight and their normal shape, not normal, but usual shape. And it's because of this time in their lives. Changes in libido, of course, are another one. Joint pains, frozen shoulder especially. These are all things that we typically don't associate with perimenopause, but unfortunately, these are signs and symptoms that the body is in that period of change. What we often see is that these symptoms are treated in isolation, where actually the root cause is hormonal. So let's talk about how perimenopause specifically impacts us as Black women. So to start, the onset of perimenopause is sometimes around 8.5 months earlier. So according to the research, Black women are reaching perimenopause as early as in our 30s. The symptom severity is also slightly different, whereas we experience the symptoms a little bit more intensely than our non-Black counterparts. So we have a longer transition, a higher prevalence of hot flashes, worse sleep disruptions, and higher rates of depression have also been studied. And we know that there is a under treatment that occurs. There is a huge treatment gap. So despite having severe symptoms and earlier onset, we also are less likely to receive things like hormone replacement therapy or mental health services. And lastly, there is a research gap. We are grossly understudied. Women's bodies are broadly understudied in the medical setting, and Black women's bodies are especially so. So when I was ear hustling as a youngster, and I was hearing the women discuss what they were going through and how they may not have had adequate answers to what they were experiencing, there's a couple of things that I'd love to name. I think that still remains even 30 years later. So firstly, structural racism is a physiologic force. Okay. So chronic stress, including the stress of navigating this system that is very racist, is going to dysregulate cortisol. As I mentioned in the previous episode, it's going to add to the disruption of hormones, and it's going to accelerate the reproductive aging. Whenever we think about a Black woman, the first thing that most people are going to think about is how resilient we are and how strong we are. And that strong Black woman trope is also a medical problem because this cultural expectation to project strength and to suppress our emotions even are not only a mental health issue because it deeply impacts our mental health, but it also is a physiological one. Why? Because women who carry this, which is most of us, unless we consciously do the work to unpack that, we are less likely to seek care, to report our symptoms, and are more likely to therefore suffer in silence. So women who have internalized this strong Black women trope and who has not done the work to intentionally unpack it are going to suffer three ways. So one, we're going to be less likely to seek care. Two, we'll be less likely to report symptoms. And three, that's going to cause us to be more likely to suffer in silence. So going back to the fibroids, or again, the fibroid, as I learned them to be, uterine fibroids impact Black women at higher rates than our non-Black counterparts. They often appear earlier and are also more severe. So one thing I would love to name at this point is that typically fibroids do run in families. So if your sibling or your parent or maybe your aunt or grandmother have fibroids, you also are at a higher risk to also developing fibroids compared to those who do not have those in their family. There's a strong genetic tie. So it's really important to be able to name things and to be able to speak about them. One of the things that I notice in a lot of our families is that we don't necessarily disclose what we are suffering with. We do not name the diagnosis. Sometimes it's because we do not know. Medical literacy is a thing, and the lack of medical literacy is something that should be really broadly discussed in so many ways. Some people just don't feel comfortable enough with their speaking with their provider and saying, hey, I don't understand exactly what you're saying. So there's lack of clarity. And that lack of clarity is going to translate in the family not also knowing. So if my sibling is experiencing something and they either can't express that with me because they don't have the language to do so or don't have the capacity for other reasons, I will not have the heads up as to, hey, this is something that I should look out for and also speak to my provider about for screenings and things of that nature. So what can you do now? First things first is I want you to know the language. So all of your symptoms that you're experiencing, whether it's related to fibroids or whether it's related to possibly perimenopause, name them. Know that you're not too young. You may think, well, I'm just 35. I'm still a young tenderoni. Yes, you are a tenderoni, but you also might be a tenderoni who's experiencing that change, which is perimenopause. Might be in the early stages of perimenopause. And the sooner we're able to name the thing, the sooner we will be able to have relief from the disturbances that these things can cause us. And it's so important to have a provider that takes what you say seriously. All of these things combined come together to play a role in body literacy. So body literacy is the ability to read, understand, and to interpret the language of your own body. So what are the signals? What are the normal rhythms and symptoms? And be able to take that information and bring that to your healthcare provider in order for you to have a conversation that can bring you closer to finding the solution for those problems. So as it relates to this conversation, what does that look like in practice? So first things first, I want you to track your cycle and your symptoms together. So not just for fertility. We want to get a full picture of our hormonal health. So being able to track changes in the cycle length, as well as your mood, your sleep, your energy, libido, those are all important data points. Your body is always talking. And body literacy means having the skill to be able to listen. The second thing is to know what to ask your doctor. So if we're talking about perimenopause, I want you to use plain language. For example, I want to talk about perimenopause, or I want my hormone levels checked, or I've been experiencing symptoms and I believe that they're hormonal. These are going to be conversation starters for you to get to the official investigation as to what all is happening within your bodies and how can we get you to a solution. Number 3, find a provider that sees you. Sometimes we forget that we are in charge. We are allowed to, and dare I say, encouraged to fire providers who do not hear us. So if you are speaking to your provider and they're not taking what you say seriously, chuck them. You are allowed to advocate for yourself and to be an active participant in your care. Again, you deserve a provider that takes your experiences seriously. So I want you to think back to your childhood and what was your experience like growing up, maybe prepubescent, even pubescent times. Where did you talk about the body with your parents or with your siblings or with the older women in your lives? And if not, I want you to think about why. Sometimes it's not that they didn't want to share the information with us. It's just that they didn't have the language themselves. The women who came before us, and I'm thinking specifically about even my grandmother, they survived without the language, sometimes without treatment, and without telling anyone what they were experiencing, and without anyone telling them that what they were experiencing was real, was valid, and worth addressing. So that is all I have for you today. I have linked down in the show notes. I have 2 resources for you. One is a conversation starter that you can have with your healthcare provider to talk about, hey, are we in perimenopause and what all can we do about it, if anything? And the second resource is a symptom checklist to validate whether you are possibly in perimenopause. I would love for you to share this episode with another woman who could use it, whether it's a sister, it's a friend, it's a coworker, it's an auntie, it's a mom, it's a neighbor, anybody. Go ahead and share this episode with them. As always, thank you so much for joining. I am so glad you're here. Until next time, be well, sis. Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Well, Sis. If you'd like to get in touch with us, there's a link in the show notes. Be Well, Sis is hosted by me, Dr. Cassandre Dunbar, and produced by Edit Audio. Don't forget to hit follow so you never miss an episode. Until next time, be well, sis.